Hello and welcome to the third annual CAPAL Research and Scholarship Committee online lecture, Not Just Research Support, Librarians as Practitioner-Researchers with Virginia Wilson. My name is Graham Lavender and I'm very pleased to be your moderator today. As you may know, CAPAL or CAPAL is the Canadian Association of Professional Academic Librarians, and I'm a member of the Research and Scholarship Committee. I'd like to thank Committee Chair Roger Chabot for his support in making this event happen and for being with us here today to help out. If you're not already a member of CAPAL, I would highly recommend joining. It's a great group of people doing some really valuable work. Please feel free to post to social media throughout today's talk using the hashtag CAPALLecture with 2 L's. If you have questions for Virginia, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom instead of the chat. It just helps keep us organized and make sure we don't miss any questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout the session and Virginia will answer at the end. The lecture is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again and share it with your friends and colleagues. It will be about 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes for Q&A. I now have the honor of introducing our speaker. Virginia Wilson is an academic librarian at the University of Saskatchewan. Over the years, she has practiced in the health sciences, social sciences, and applied sciences. She is the founder and former director of the Center for Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice, CAPAL. As a practitioner-researcher, Virginia has published several research projects, works on research methods, and commentaries on the librarian as a practitioner-researcher. Now, if you're in the audience, your microphone and camera are off, so we can't hear you, but don't let that stop you from giving a round of applause for Virginia Wilson.
I'm going to assume it's really big applause and people going woo woo. So
definitely.
Thank you so much, Graham. I'm really happy to be here today. And hang on, sorry. There we go. Before I start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging where I am for this talk. As we gather today, I'm on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. I pay my respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place. I know that many of you are across Canada and even elsewhere and are situated on other territories. And if you would like to, I invite you to share where you are in the chat as we affirm our relationship to one another. All right, coming up, it seems like a really long list of stuff, but it's basically just the headings of all my sections. We're going to start with an introduction and then go through that list, ending with some reasons why we should do this. Now, I'd like to thank the CAPAL's Research and Scholarship Committee for inviting me to present to you today. The topic of librarians as researchers is really near and dear to my heart, as I've spent several years actively supporting librarians, especially at my home institution, and in their research endeavors. And I've been vocal in my belief that librarians can and should not only conduct research to inform practice, but also publish that research, broaden our evidence base, and participate in the international conversations about libraries and librarianship that take place all around us. I'm approaching the topic of librarians as practitioner-researchers from the perspective of being an academic librarian in an institution that has rigorous standards for tenure and promotion that include developing a program of research with a sustained trajectory to be built over the course of one's career. I recognize that this state of being puts me in a privileged position. Research is a mandate, and I've been driven by the dual incentives of wanting to do it and having to do it. Now, I started preparing for this presentation by going to the literature to take a look for any new research on the topic of librarians as researchers. Now, much to my surprise, and having not limited my search by date, I came up with some vintage articles that blew my mind, and I'd like to share a couple with you here. In 1975, Ralph M. Edwards published a paper that focused on the differentiation of library management and librarians as professionals. This article outlined the criteria for what constitutes a profession, stating that librarianship had not yet attained the position of a profession. He then went on to list professional functions that should be performed by practicing librarians. First, and of crucial importance, he declares, is the function of research directed towards expanding and developing the body of professional knowledge. He acknowledged that all librarians wouldn't be able to be involved in original research, but said that most should and many must do so if librarianship is to develop into a profession. Edwards wraps up his discourse on librarians conducting research with the following: a great increase in creative and sound research that will build the knowledge base of librarianship is needed, and research should be recognized by all librarians as a professional function for which paid time must be provided. And again, this was published in 1975. In March of '79, a conference was held in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, entitled Library Research for Librarians. The conference was intended to stimulate practicing librarians to undertake research by helping them identify research topics, devise workable methodologies, recognize the standards by which research is judged, and understand the requirements for preparation of manuscripts to be published. Now, in reading 3 short articles written by 3 of the presenters at this conference, I found out that the conference could be held today. The papers dealt with conducting research, funding research, and publishing research. So 43 years ago, librarians were gathering and talking about much the same things that we are talking about today in this larger conversation of librarians as researchers. But I believe that our body of knowledge has gotten richer, our academic librarians have gotten way more prolific and skilled in research, and our supports for research have been increased. So what is a practitioner-researcher and what is practitioner research? Now, this role is present in many different disciplines. In the health context, Janos and Zedonis' definition of a clinician researcher is an individual who both conducts research and provides direct service. Shaw, in the social work field, defines practitioner involvement in research as the evaluation, research, development, or more general inquiry that is small scale, local, grounded, and carried out by professionals who directly deliver those self-same services. Turning to librarianship, Watson Boone speaks about practitioner-researchers in really that seminal article she wrote in the context of academic libraries, and states that they approach projects and problems in ways that yield 1, solutions, 2, an enlarged understanding of their actual field of work, their practice, and 3, improvements to that practice. Peter Jarvis, an internationally known authority in the field of professional, adult, and continuing education, who literally wrote the book on practitioner research, boils it down to simply being a practitioner who does research. He does go on to state that the research should necessarily be about one's practice and that the methodology should always be case study because the research is always about one's practice. Now, I thought about that last bit a lot. In my situation here at the University of Saskatchewan, there are no restrictions of what we can conduct research on. Researching our own practice is a way to save time, kind of combine the 2 things. And it's a way that assists in our decision-making and service providing. But with academic freedom and as tenured and tenure-track faculty members, we can research whatever we want. So I have colleagues who research their own practice, ones who research broader LIS topics, and ones who research in other subject-specific areas, such as Latin America, history, and Indigenous studies. It does beg the question, though, are the librarians researching to inform their practice practitioner-researchers? And what about those who look at the broader LIS topics or subject-specific topics? Are they practitioner-researchers or just researchers? I'm inclined to look at any practicing librarian who does any kind of research as a practitioner-researcher, whether they focus on their practice or not. I like to be open and inclusive that way. So for me, a practitioner-researcher in librarianship in the context of this talk is a person engaged in the practice of a skilled profession who also conducts research. And speaking of case studies, what about practitioner research? Well, as mentioned, Jarvis figures it's case studies or nothing. And that's not an uncommon view. There are many names to this type of research. It goes by participatory action research, just plain action research, practitioner-led inquiry, community action research, that kind of thing. And it's found a lot in education, in teachers doing their own research. Shaw and Lunt from the social work field suggest that there are different forms of practitioner research and that using a blanket term for all instances of such inquiry may confuse rather than enlighten. These two go on to quote a document called the Salisbury Statement that was developed at a UK conference in the mid-2000s. And of course, it was a social work conference. And it states that the research must be practice-minded from the start in order for it to be valuable in practice. Now, this is I find this fascinating and interesting idea, as it might mitigate some of the issues librarians have when we try to apply the research evidence that's out there to our practice. And some you just can't, or you find it hard to. And so there's a gap in that process that practice-minded research might be able to fill. So I'd like to talk a bit about my own research. A few years ago, more than I would care to admit, I did a research project about librarians as researchers. And I talked to librarians using semi-structured interviews, 15 in total from Canada and the UK, who self-identified as practitioner-researchers. And I wanted to get a sense of how they saw themselves in the role, or is it roles, of librarian and researcher. Most of these librarians were academic librarians, but there were some special librarians as well. The participants self-identified as practitioner-researchers, or as I had defined that, practicing librarians who also conduct research and who had demonstrable research outputs, which were either disseminated externally via conference or publication, or internally via reports or internal presentations. And the purpose of this research was to identify key issues, to explore the challenges, benefits, possible risks of conducting research in a practice setting, and to investigate what it means to be a practitioner-researcher. So coming up, I'm going to talk about a few of the themes that I discovered while taking a grounded theory approach, and I'm going to also add in some other research in this area. And you'll have to excuse me for 1 second. Now you can hear me swallow. Okay. So first of all, I want to talk about defining research. And I asked my interviewees to talk about how they define research for themselves. Now, this led to the idea of real research. And this would be real research as opposed to librarian research that we do in our day jobs. First of all, librarian research is the type of research that we do when helping patrons find something in the databases. It's what we do in doing a lit search, maybe a literature review. It's the kind of stuff we're taught in library school as librarians. Often this type of work will take place during our day jobs, that is, during our work as librarians interacting with patrons. Now, the day job is in opposition to our role as practitioner-researchers, or it can be. And often it takes precedence over that role, even though several interviewees saw the two roles, librarian and researcher, as inseparable. And often when the notion of the day job was invoked, so was the idea of the research piece being an add-on, something tacked on over and above the real work we do as librarians. It's all very fraught. One participant definitely saw research as an add-on and said, it's an extra bit. You're not expected to do that, but people do it because they think they want to give back to their profession. And so that's where I would see it being an add-on. Having research as part of a librarian's job is less common in the UK than it is in Canada. And for that librarian, research wasn't a requirement for career advancement, yet it was going on anyway. And Maureen Babb in 2020 reported her research participants as also viewing research as both a duty and a responsibility, or as an add-on or an extra. Research was either essential to the discipline and libraries had the responsibility to the discipline to conduct it, or something that was often considered to be separate from other duties of librarians outlined in their specific job description, even when research was formally required. Real research then is research that involves an actual methodology and is what we often find in peer-reviewed scholarly journals in various fields. A Canadian participant said, my first thought when you said research is that sort of actual, like real academic type of scholarly work. The dissemination part of research is essential as well, and we can see that in these personal definitions of research. And I'll read from a Canadian participant. I still firmly believe that dissemination and publication is the key part defining quality of research. It doesn't matter how much I do internally, but without that kind of dissemination, that does actually define research for me. And another said, I guess when I think about research, that's what I do think about is reporting it externally. It was interesting to me to compile the various personal definitions of research. There was quite a bit of variety, so I've got a couple more. If I'm a practicing librarian doing research to come up with a response that needs to be implemented, to me that's research in support of practice. If I'm doing a more foundational, theoretical, conceptual thing, then to me that's more research because there's no intended implementation. Research, as another one said, probably goes off in sort of two directions as well, informing your own practice, but then thinking about, oh, where else can it go? Where else can it take me next? So emerging from the interviews, research in the context of librarianship is inquiry. It can be tied to practice. It's a variety of methodologies. It's creating a study, gathering data, analyzing outcomes, and reporting externally. The personal definitions I found in my research of research span the continuum between being quite deliberate and specific in terms of process and to being very broad and inclusive. So a theme that emerged early in the analysis and continued strong is the idea of an encouraging environment. Librarians who felt good about their ability to explore research ideas to the end most often mention the benefit of having an encouraging environment in which to do so. Some librarians want to be part of that environment, creating it, so as to help other librarians with their research activities. Now, it might seem obvious, but having a research positive environment is beneficial for librarians who conduct research. The support is helpful when it comes from higher ups, from administration, but it's important to have one's collegial peers participating in that environment as well. It's valuable when research becomes an accepted part of the culture. Encouragement and support come in both formal and informal forms. It might be in the form of funds being made available for research projects, or it might be having a colleague pass along a call for a conference paper that seems to be perfect for you. There are broad views of how encouragement is manifest in an organization, requirements and standards, peer mentorship, more formal mentorship, recognition of productivity, support in terms of resources, the general acceptance of research and research-related activities. A Canadian interviewee said, I had a supervisor who was very supportive. She was very encouraging. You have to start thinking about research. You have to start thinking about this. She just kept reminding me, like, you should look at this conference here, look at this conference program. And in the UK, the general atmosphere is it encourages everybody to produce papers. Research and publishing are not a requirement, but because the general atmosphere here is to foster research, it encourages people to develop themselves professionally. Now, this almost casual encouragement normalizes the idea of research as part of the job. If people are speaking about it like, of course, you'll present at this conference, it becomes part of the culture, part of the job, and less of a standalone activity. Kennedy, Brancalini, and Kennedy, in their study of high-performing librarian researchers, found that the environment that many respondents found most conducive to developing as a researcher included high expectations, a variety of supports for research, and extrinsic rewards such as salary increase, tenure, promotion, and opportunities for advancement. In another study, Kennedy and Brancalini found a statistically significant correlation between librarians conducting research and institutional support. Another piece of the encouraging environment includes encouragement for librarians to help themselves, encouragement for them to protect their research time, to take that research time, to take responsibility for one's own research and progress. If it's the kind of thing that isn't valued in the organization, it can be tough for the librarian to just stand up and do it. A couple of my participants felt very strongly about personal responsibility. As one said, I think the more we can stop looking at administration and looking to be safe or to be supported, just the stronger we're going to be in terms of researchers, that we take that control and we try to create the things we need. Encouragement from administration, mentors, peers, colleagues is all wrapped up in a cycle that includes getting results, research results, publication, tangible rewards from the process, and along with confidence. So self-esteem, confidence to start a project, confidence in the ability to see the project through. I think that's really important, the confidence piece. An encouraging environment doesn't have to be internal to your organization. It can be wherever the librarian-researcher can find support and encouragement, such as associations like CAPAL, informal research groups or journal clubs, listservs, regular attended conferences or meeting, that kind of thing. And on the other side of the coin, I would be remiss not to mention it here. Hoffman, Berg, and Koufagianakis in 2017 ran a quantitative study to explore the factors that encourage research productivity in academic librarians. They signified productivity by looking at research outputs. And they found that the participants' expressed desire for supportive institutional climates is in tension with the finding that feeling supported by one's institution and feeling expected to do research were not significantly related to research outputs. So whether or not the encouraging environment results in outputs, librarians do want that environment for themselves and their own work. Okay, sorry, I flipped ahead here. Identity is an interesting theme that emerged in a variety of ways during the interviews, and it got me thinking about labels versus identity. So the names other people might give us, you know, in opposition to the names that we give ourselves, the external versus the internal. One interviewee told me a story of a colleague referring to her as a scholarly librarian because she did research, and the tone wasn't complimentary. So it appears that the research piece of our jobs gives us a sense of self that just being a librarian does not. Being seen as a researcher can help our status within our institutions. If other faculty know that the librarians are conducting research, it gives us a common ground with them. A participant said, I feel as though essentially I'm here to help and facilitate other people. That's my job, to help them in their research. But I feel as though conducting research myself helps me appreciate their difficulties and how they're working. So it gives me an insight into how other people are working as well. Research validates us as professionals, another said. At a very practical level, it puts us on par with the people that we're working with, so they value the skills. Bab reported that the university faculty members that she consulted acknowledged that if librarians conducted research, certainly that enhanced the place of librarians within the academic community. We play a lot of roles as librarians, and how we label ourselves and how other labels us is important, as are the reasons behind those labels. Any or perhaps every label is mostly limiting. However, self-identification as a researcher or as a practitioner-researcher has benefits for the individual on a professional as well as a very personal level. So, of course, there are challenges that come from being a practitioner-researcher, conducting research as well as doing the day job. These have been well documented across a lot of studies. But I did ask my participants specifically about their challenges, and some that came up were very pervasive, like the first on this list, but others arose that were quite unique, and I've chosen 4 to talk about today. So first of all, of course, it comes as no surprise that the challenge that came up across the board was time, finding time to do that research. When there's a time crunch on the job, then the research side can suffer. The interesting part about the time challenge, though, is that it emerged as kind of a 2-pronged theme. On one hand, it can be hard to find time to do the research within the regular workload of your practice. And on the other hand, there's the view that we can make time and we can always get it done, but only up to a certain point. Once critical mass is reached, then something has to give. I've read several articles and blog posts in the past few years about the cult of the busy and the negative benefits, yes, negative benefits that we can get from labeling ourselves as busy. I would say that the librarians I interviewed who were the most excited about their research role and who seemed to be quite productive were the ones who had the just do it philosophy. Perhaps they're just innately good at time management, but I got the sense that they were doing pretty much everything they wanted to do on all parts of the practitioner research continuum. Now, for those of us who really feel that time challenge, I'd like to tell you about what a colleague of mine does. Just the other day, she sent around an Excel spreadsheet for librarians to track our vacation time. But the spreadsheet also included time slots for research and what she labeled as work, the general library aspects of our job. She developed this time log to track the actual time she spent on these activities. And she told me via email that she came up with the idea when she went from a term position to a tenure track position and became pre-tenured, and had to all of a sudden fit the research work in. She quickly realized that the way her professional practice was, she would be constantly stealing research time to meet those demands. So she wanted a tool to track the actual time she worked on research. My colleague wanted to make sure that her various roles were being covered with enough time for each. And in 2001, Jean Brown published a paper outlining 7 years of compiling and analyzing her own time log to find out where her time was going between the job, research, and service. At one point, she noted a drop in research time taken, and she attributes at least part of the decline in time spent on research to becoming concerned that she might become the kind of librarian who allows an interest in publishing to take precedence over job duties, which I thought was interesting. And this is after she states that she sees research as part of the job. But the conflict between her role as librarian and her role as researcher caused her some issues. Now, she went on to write that she had since resolved that difficulty, but unfortunately does not say how. Another challenge, which is somewhat related to time, is the discipline or the self-motivation to get in there and get some research done. Because the day job has potential to overtake the research piece, it can be a struggle to shift the focus. As one participant said, and then finding the time, discipline. It's not just time, it's discipline to get that research done, because it's never required to the same extent as sitting at the reference desk is required. Social psychologist Jose Navarro and his research partners looked at work motivation fluctuations in a 2013 study. They wanted to find out if motivation was irregular and unstable, and whether or not it depended on the tasks the workers were doing. So like maybe a boring task equals low motivation. Now, what they found was that work motivation is a dynamic process that presents fluctuations throughout the day and week. And they found that the tasks do not matter. The fluctuations in motivation happened no matter what the workers were doing. So this makes me wonder if finding the self-motivation to do the research part of our jobs is affected not only by what is required, but what seems to be the fluctuating motivation for work tasks that happens no matter what the task is. I think I'm going to go with that one from now on. Now, the idea that research is never required to the same extent as other pieces of our job is also tied to what is rewarded, which is the next challenge that emerged. Is performance as a librarian and practice of professional skills rewarded more or more tangibly than performance as a researcher? One Canadian participant of mine said, I feel that the evaluation and validation is not there. Research is a requirement, it's pushed, but nothing is actually done to encourage and maintain and validate that work. Now, I think that whether this is the case or not is probably variable across institutions. I know that in Canada alone, there's not the same standards, requirements, rewards, or even attitudes when it comes to research across academic libraries. However, if librarians feel that their work is not valued or validated, then it can cause tension and present a variety of challenges dependent on the local context. And the last challenge that came up, one of them, was the division between researching and non-researching librarians. And I believe that this theme could stem from the fact that research and peer-reviewed publication requirements haven't been as stringent in the past as they are now. There can be tensions between librarians who are embracing the research part of their job and those who aren't. And I get a sense from some of the responses from participants that there is what feels like defensiveness on the part of librarians who don't do the research, almost as if they feel something will be lost if the researcher role is embraced. Perhaps it's as simple as how everyone is defining the role of librarian, and for some that definition does not include researcher. Regardless, having a divided camp in an organization can present challenges to all involved. Okay, going from kind of the dark side of doing research as a librarian to the benefits, which is my favorite part. First of all, research is interesting. It helps to satisfy curiosity and inquisitiveness. And one participant said, it's awesome. I don't have anything intelligent or even possibly intelligent to say because it's just ... Why wouldn't you? So research is interesting. It's also an opportunity. Many of my librarians participating see conducting research as a great opportunity. It adds to the day job, expands it in new and different areas. Sometimes the day job might not fulfill every aspect of a librarian's professional desires, and conducting research can help alleviate that. Research can fill part of a professional need for validation that straight librarianship, as I had termed it, might not. Kennedy, Brancalini, and Kennedy reported that 45 out of 46 survey respondents in their study of accomplished librarian researchers responded yes to the question, publishing gives me a personal sense of satisfaction. And then there's identity. Research is also tied up with identity. And one participant talking about research serving the personal benefit of making the job and her professional identity more interesting and rewarding. She felt that conducting research made her a better librarian. And that's probably tied in with the role of researcher being, beneficial when connecting with faculty and students or other library patrons who are also experiencing the research process. We as researchers know what they're going through and what they mean when they're talking about their research. Research enhances our skill sets, can make us more thoughtful and reflective about what we do and how we make decisions. Conducting research as librarians also allows us to push the boundaries, and we're often bound in other areas of practice by such things as budgets or institutional mandates, that kind of thing. One participant said it's a place that really, in an academic position, no one can tell you what's right and wrong, and yet in all other areas of our practice, we have some boundaries. It's just wide open in the research realm, and I think that's the exciting part and a good place to be. Conducting research also can provide avenues for collaboration, connection, and conversation. To be part of the profession in a different way, as one respondent said. And one of the interviewees said this, just the skills of doing research are important, and it doesn't matter what you are studying. It really informs the rest of your work because you're helping researchers, so knowing what research is important. And I want to wrap up this bit with a quote from one of my research participants. We were talking about why librarians might not conduct research. And this person was thinking that perhaps it's because some librarians think they just can't do it, that they work in ordinary libraries and that they're ordinary librarians, and that maybe research is, how they put it, for special other people. This librarian went on to say, we're ordinary librarians and there's nothing special about us. Working together, we can build confidence together. And I found that quite inspiring. Okay, so is the practitioner-researcher one role or two? In my own research, I found it interesting that I had some librarians talking about the day job and the research bit as two separate things, while others saw the two as necessarily interwoven. One participant stated that it's all of a whole. I don't think they're separate at all, they're interlinked. Another said, I don't think of myself as a librarian first and a researcher second, and I think that the research serves a purpose within my librarianship, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. Oftentimes during the interviews, interestingly enough, a librarian might talk of research and practice of being very separate, and then later talk about how necessary the research piece is to our moving forward as a profession. So one role or two. Well, there can be tension as we grapple with the many hats that we wear as librarians, and we, as you know, play many roles in the course of our careers. Teachers, instructors, catalogers, liaison or subject librarians, having expertise in a variety of specialties like RDM, open access, synthesis reviews, IT, digitization. We can be administrators and researchers, and these roles can come into conflict with one another. Role theory has been a concept in social psychology and sociology for about 100 years. It takes acting or playing roles as a metaphor for social interactions. Now, there's obviously not enough time to really go into role theory in depth, but the gist of it is, role theory is a conceptual explanation of social behavior that assumes individuals' actions are defined in part by the role they occupy in relationships. The theory suggests that by enacting roles, individuals establish exchange relationships with one another, building interdependence that is essential for social coordination. I did some looking around. Role theory has been applied to marriage counseling, nursing, and other health professions, organizations, international relations, and gender and politics, to name just a few. And it's been applied to librarianship in relation to librarians' teaching roles. Now, there are several subsets to role theory, including organizational role theory. It provides insight into the processes that affect the physical and emotional state of an individual in the workplace that affects their workplace behavior. ORT has at its base 4 assumptions, and the last one is role conflict. And in ORT, this assumption states that conflict will arise, excuse me, when role expectations embedded in one role conflict with the expectations associated with another role. Now, as I mentioned before, librarians are responsible for many areas in our professional lives, and for a long time, research wasn't part of that. Then librarians gained faculty status, or we started practicing in an evidence-based way, or started looking at library assessment. And soon research was expected for tenure and promotion, or to find the best evidence in decision-making, or for assessing ways that the library has value for the larger organization. Then a new role became librarian as researcher. The push and pull of research activities might come into conflict with the other aspects of our job, even when research is a required part of our job. Playing the roles of librarian and researcher and whatever other roles we might play all involve different aspects of us as characters, so to speak. Shoup, Wambaugh, and Bramble, in a study on role-related stress experienced by academic librarians, found that academic librarians working in a variety of capacities experienced high levels of role ambiguity and role overload. And these are part of role conflict. And while researcher was not a specified role in this study, the work suggests that many roles librarians play can come into conflict with one another and cause stress. And I would also say that if this role conflict doesn't cause stress, it probably at least creates a sense of uncertainty as we take on a variety of broad-based tasks in our work. When we think about our assignments, which may include research, are we playing an integrated librarian-researcher role? Or are these two roles in conflict? Or are these two roles parallel with no conflict and we just get on with it? So as you see at the end of the slide, I do not have a definitive answer. I suspect that the answer would be different for all of us, for each of us, depending on how our own social roles on the job interact with each other and how comfortable we are managing those roles. Okay, so what about key characteristics of a librarian, practitioner, researcher? Now, you might see yourself in some of these and you might not, but I chose a few here. The first is research-minded and not research-resistant. Being research-minded is an essential practitioner attribute, a capacity to critically reflect on practice to develop researchable questions, a capacity to be informed by knowledge and research related to librarianship values, and capacity to understand research designs and related methodologies in order to theorize about practice. And that was adapted from Harrison and Humphreys in the Austin, Del Santos, and Lee article. And I'll have a list of references at the end that I can pass along if you're interested in them. The second characteristic is undertaking reflective practice. If we're going to move forward as practitioners and as researchers, we need to reflect on what we're doing. Now, this seems pretty obvious, but when things are moving quickly, it can be difficult to deliberately stop and take the time to think about what we're doing, how we're working, and what we need to know. Donald Schoen, in his 1983 book, The Reflective Practitioner, How Professionals Think in Action, writes, "A practitioner's reflection can serve as a corrective to overlearning. Through reflection," and he uses the pronoun he to mean all of us, I guess, "he can surface and criticize the tacit understandings that have grown up around the repetitive experience of a specialized practice and can make new sense of the situations of uncertainty or uniqueness which he may allow himself to experience." Reflective practice takes as its focal point lifelong learning. The idea is we need to reflect on what we're doing in order to learn from it and move forward. In 2007, Maria Grant did a systematic review entitled "The Role of Reflection in the Library and Information Sector." And she found that the greatest personal and professional benefit is reported when time is given to considering the implications of past events on future practice, that is, analytical reflection. As a practitioner-researcher, you might reflect on practice, have it inform your research, then reflect on the research, and then keep going like that. There are many permutations of that to explore and lots of benefits on reflecting on your own pursuits. Then curiosity. Why would you do research? Yes, it's to inform your practice, add to the knowledge base, you might have to do it, but hopefully there's some curiosity in there as well, an inquiring mind just wanting to know why something is. And I really think the curiosity can help sustain you through the process. If you tie curiosity in with reflective practice, you can get deeper into a lot of things about your practice and your research. And curiosity is part of being research-minded as well. And then I want to talk a bit about a mindset that includes embracing uncertainty, accepting the occasional setback, and an attitude of lifelong learning, a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset. Now, I know that this concept has had a lot of holes shot through it in the years since Carol Dweck's book came out. But I think that conceptually, the ideas behind the growth mindset work here. It allows one to understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They see not knowing something as a welcome challenge. And if we approach research through the lens of a growth mindset, then we can learn anything, any methodology, any theory. Learning becomes part of the process, and we aren't thrown by a setback or uncertainty. It's a normal state of being. In fact, I would say in any kind of creative venture, and I would argue that research has a high element of creativity involved as we're constructing or revealing something new, there are times of great uncertainty. And in his book, Uncertainty, Turning Fear and Doubt into Fuel for Brilliance, Jonathan Field writes that when creating or building, one must manage times of uncertainty, risk of loss, and exposure to criticism and judgment, and that you may need to live in this place until the project takes on enough form to prove the validity of the vision. And I like that. You need to go on until it actually looks like something, and then you can feel better about it. By paying attention to mindset, we can push through that uncertainty we might feel as librarians who conduct research, maybe that imposter syndrome that we're feeling, and come out on the other side with more confidence and with research that is useful and that can take its place in the body of LIS knowledge. And the last one I want to talk about, the last key characteristic of practitioner-researchers is courage. Research, no doubt about it, can be a challenge. Starting a study can feel incredibly daunting. We might feel ill-equipped to do this, like maybe we didn't learn enough in library school, or we don't have a PhD, although some of you might well have a PhD and may still feel some trepidation, or we don't feel strong in research methodology. Those are all really common feelings, and that's where courage comes in, feeling the fear, yet choosing to act. All it takes is that first step. Thinking about the whole thing can be immobilizing. So take it piece by piece, one foot in front of the other. Having the will to start, to believe in yourself in this aspect is what it takes. So do be brave in this exciting adventure that we're on together. Okay, so it's helpful to have that encouraging environment, and fostering a culture of research is a good way to actually do that. And I want to talk a bit about how we did that here at the University of Saskatchewan Library. As mentioned in my bibliography, I was the founder and director, now former director of the Center for Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice, or as we called it, CEBLIP. And the goals of the center are to promote evidence-based practice and to support librarians as researcher. My position as director, which I held for 5 years, largely involved participating in the creation of a culture of research at our library. I wanted to support the new librarians as they started to develop their programs of research. And I wanted to encourage mid and later career librarians to undertake research projects to inform their practice. The library was completely behind this work, and a research facilitator was hired to work with librarians in all aspects of our research, from grant writing to research topics to brainstorming ideas. I worked closely with the facilitator, and together we progressed a number of initiatives related to librarians doing research. First of all, I want to talk about mentorship, and mentorship comes in many flavors. It can be formal, it can be informal, it can be peer mentorship. Excuse me. And the peer mentorship, I think that's what really does it for me. We encourage librarians to talk to one another about their research. And for every new pre-tenured librarian that came into our collegium, we created a research mentorship team, which included a librarian from here at USask, a librarian or another type of faculty member from outside of the library, a research facilitator, and myself. Now, this group took the new librarian from the start of their position to the tenure application, assisting with the creation of an initial program of research, which is required by our standards. So that structured mentorship team for the new librarians, I think, has really been helpful over the past years. Then there's research networks, encouraging the building of personal research networks, either in-house or elsewhere. I'm going to refer to Kennedy, Brancolini, and Kennedy again. They found that a high number of persons in the networks who both know each other and do research together is significantly related to research output. The denser the research network is in terms of research collaborations, the higher the research output. Now, CAPAL had started developing a larger international research network. It had quite a bit of momentum, but then we had a change of leadership and the priorities changed, and so that never made it to fruition. And so that can be a challenge in developing that culture of research. And then there's sharing research, developing some kind of a gathering, either internal or external to the library. At USask, we have what's called Librarians Forum, and it meets periodically throughout the year. Librarians who have been on sabbatical are encouraged to present their research from their sabbatical at the forum when they come back. And CAPAL also created the Fall Symposium, and we had 3 of those, 2014, 15, and 16. And they were spectacular, if I do say so myself. Librarians came from all across Canada to present their research. They presented about doing research, and then they networked. And of course, for Canada, we have the wonderful Concordia Library Research Forum, which has been running since 2002. I've been lucky to be there once, and it was a great event. So often you'll find research streams too in the provincial library conferences. So sharing experiences, either the research itself or the process of doing it, your trials and tribulations, is a powerful method of generating that culture of research. And then there's group activities. We had a writing group and a journal club. We developed both of these. The writing group it went for a few years and it kind of petered out, but was quite successful while it ran. And it really depended if people had something to write or not. But the journal club is still going strong, with librarians and library staff meeting every 6 weeks or so to discuss articles chosen by the rotating conveners. And I know now that the CAPAL and its new director, Catherine Bowden, well, new as of a couple years, they have research conversations over the lunch hour, and they get together and talk about research. I am sure that there are many libraries out there doing interesting and innovative things to support librarian researchers and to create that culture. And even 1 or 2 activities can be helpful, and they don't have to be large scale to be valuable. If you are interested in establishing or promoting a culture of research in your library, I can suggest further reading by Liz Walkley-Hall, and she's from Flinders University in Australia. That library took a very programmatic approach to developing and sustaining their culture of research, and they've been active for several years now. And work from Miggy Picton at the University of Northampton in the UK. Miggy's no longer there, but when she was a whirlwind at creating that culture. Her work is helpful. She looks at top-down and bottom-up approaches to facilitating a research culture. Okay, I am unclear as to what the time is at all, so I'm just going to keep on rolling, and I only have a few pages left here. So I want to mention 2 things after all of this. Most of the research that I've included here was conducted pre-COVID. It would be interesting and beneficial, I think, to see what's happened, if anything, to librarians as practitioner-researchers as a result of the pandemic. Are things still the same? Is there even less time for research? Is research just another time sink in a world that includes COVID and all kinds of other stuff? In the past couple of years, there have been papers published about the effects of COVID on PhD students and early career researchers. And I found a 2021 study with animal behavior and welfare researchers that focused on gender, care role, career state, and teaching mood during COVID. And this study found that for the majority of respondents, research tasks competed with an increasing teaching load and increased childcare. So there's just more stuff we had to do outside of our work during this pandemic. And the fallout from that substantially affected early career researchers, and especially those with children. The resulting potential gap in research activity on the academic CV would need to be addressed by funders and recognized by funders and employers, with recognition given for the unusual circumstances brought on by the pandemic, which hampered scholarly activity. And then there's the issue of precarity in librarian jobs. And we're seeing this more and more. And I'm not happy. So term or sessional appointments that may not have research as part of their work assignments. So how do these librarians get research experience beyond doing it off the side of their desks on their own time, which I just don't think is right. So finding a research partner or a team to join can provide experience when when the sessional or term appointment is finished and a more permanent job is obtained. There's a very helpful book out there called Reflections on Practitioner Research, a practical guide for information professionals, and it was published in 2020. Maureen Babb, who I really admire with her work on practitioner-researchers, she contributed a chapter entitled Small Projects Add Up, Doing Research as a Sessional Librarian, and she writes from her own experience. Now, there's much to take from this chapter, whether you're on a term position or not, especially the tips at the end of the chapter. And these include, try to fit your research into work you're already doing, as time for research can be difficult to access. And don't be discouraged if your project does not turn out exactly as you had anticipated. And actually, I think that last tip is good advice for any one of us conducting research. Okay, we're in the final stretch here. Why should we do this? I really believe that we should conduct research to inform our practice, to add to the body of knowledge. I think it's, for all the reasons I've talked about, I think that's why I believe in it. But I've got a few to pass along to you at the end here. So developing a program of research enhances our development as librarians. It helps us to keep up with our areas of practice and interest and allows us to contribute in a really unique way to our profession. Our research can give us more in common with the faculty members and grad students that we serve. And as more and more universities are promoting research for undergraduates, our skills and experience in this area will be more prized than ever. Conducting research can transform our practice. As librarians, we've made the commitment to help people access information. And I think that that commitment also involves creating new information about something that we have intimate knowledge of, our practice. We are different from and complementary to the LIS scholars, and what we look at and what we research can enhance what they do, often by virtue of being alongside it. So when you're looking at the literature, ideally, you're getting a balanced mix of research by LIS scholars and by practicing librarians. I'm not sure that we have that balance quite right yet, but no one knows our practice like we do, and no one knows what we need in terms of research outputs that we can apply to our practice like we do. And we need that research, that practice-minded research that the Salisbury Statement spoke of, research that is conducted with practice in mind. And who better to do that, as I mentioned, than ourselves? I've included a link to the Salisbury Statement in my references. It's an interesting read because although it comes from the social work field, the authors, in their words, tried to formulate a statement which might be applied more broadly in all professions where the research of practice is important. And I do think that the research of practice in librarianship and any research that we choose to do is important because we're doing it. Yeah, sounds good. Anyways, that wraps up my talk today. Thank you so much for attending. It's really been an honor to speak with you. I'm going to flip through my final slides here. I've got the acknowledgement slides about the photos and suchly, and my references. And I've got three. Are you reading them? Because I think you are. I've got four slides of references. And if you're interested in them, I can, you can email me, virginia.wilson@usas.ca, and I can pass them along to you. I think we have time for some questions or comments or thoughts. And again, thank you so much. And thank you to CAPAL for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Virginia. That
Whew.
was fantastic. That was, and yeah, you have taken us up to just about the end of the hour, but
Oh,
but that's fine. That's great. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have wanted you to cut any of that out because it was all great stuff. Yeah, so if people want to get their hands on these slides, can they email you? Is that okay?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. My slides are pretty skimpy, as you noticed. I did a lot more talking than sliding, but the references I think are interesting. So, but you can have it all. So,
Absolutely.
oh, thank you to all of the comments. Thank you, Maureen and Mayland and everybody. Oh,
Yeah.
Megan, thank you.
So yeah, so in the Q&A, we have a few questions here. So the first one was just about the bibliography of the research that you mentioned, so that people can email you about that.
Yeah.
And then Elizabeth was also asking about the Excel spreadsheet you were talking about where people were tracking their time. So she says, would you be able to share a copy of that as well? Or have you settled on other methods for tracking / scheduling research time versus day job time?
Well, I think I will ask my colleague, although I suspect she won't mind, but I'll ask her if I can share that spreadsheet. She's a spreadsheet queen. And, I think any kind of, you could use a spreadsheet or like just write your time down. I don't know. There's many ways you could track that. But what I get from my colleague is that keeping track of it like that in a real formal kind of way is really helpful. I think it's helped her a lot. So, but I'll ask. I'm going to write this stuff down.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Okay. So yes. Oh yeah, sorry, you put your email address in the chat, but I think it just went to the
Yes.
host. So
it just went to you. Sorry.
Roger did it at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Good.
All right.
So do you have a minute or two for just a couple more questions?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
we can talk all day.
Good. Okay. Well, anyone in the audience, if you have to leave, we totally understand that. Thank you so much for joining us. But we do have a couple more questions that I'd like to get to here.
Sure.
So Gavin says, thanks for this great presentation. You mentioned that the idea of practitioner-researcher need not be directly to one's own practice. Do you have any perspective from your experience or research about the role of librarians as peer or cooperative researchers with other faculty? I find that so often librarians undertaking research feel siloed within LIS research, while they may have expertise that could contribute to research in other areas, though perhaps other faculty don't view them as true peers. Do you have any experience or perspective on how to foster librarian faculty researcher relationships? Medical, yeah,
Thank you, Gavin.
Medical research is the only example that jumps to mind where librarians are commonly included as co-authors on publications, for example, systematic reviews.
Yeah, and thank you, Gavin. That's a great statement / question / comment. Health sciences was what I was thinking of too, and systematic or synthesis reviews, because I have colleagues who are in education and in psychology, and they're also involved in systematic reviews. But yeah, we're involved as librarians usually. Sometimes it can go beyond that, but I think that yeah, I agree that I think faculty wouldn't think of us really, but I think, I don't know, as we get more and more into the research part of things, as we get our ORCID and have our publications in ORCID and have that ORCID in our email address, and we're I'm talking to faculty via email, then they might click on that. Like, there's just these little things that might give us more visibility. And I know in our previous my previous dean, she was really keen on promoting the librarians as researchers and having the whole university know what we do. And so she took, steps to create, research lectures and that kind of thing to talk with our Office of the Vice President Research about librarians and the research we were conducting. So often having those higher level talks, I think, can help as well if your uppers are into that. So I hope that helps or answer something anyway.
Great. Okay, one more question. Tara is asking about whether the research that you did on librarian practitioners has been published yet, and if so, how can we find it?
I knew somebody was going to ask that. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to come clean. I did that research 10 years ago now. So as time went on, I kept saying, oh, my data is in kindergarten and that kind of thing. And so my data is in grade 4 now, I think. But I've done a lot of talks on it, and there's actually a chapter, and I was going to bring the book and I've forgotten it, but it's Alison Brettel and Denise Kufajanakis put out an edited book on evidence-based library and information practice. And I have a chapter in there on practitioner-researchers, and much of my research has been included in there. So that's my main venue for publication. I have not done a peer-reviewed article on it. And now that it's 10 years, I probably won't. But I have to live with that shame. So.
Okay, well, thanks. That's the end of the questions, and we are past the hour now. So thank you again, Virginia. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for delivering this lecture today, and thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much. I see people from far and wide, so thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk to you, and I wish I could see you in person, all of you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Take care.